So let's start with a half butterfly, as we often do. Right leg is straight, left foot comes to the inside of the thigh. And then you can support your left knee, forearms, or forehead with some blocks or a bolster. You could also sit on something to tilt you forward more aggressively if necessary. And basically you're looking for a stretch here, the hamstrings, the back of the thigh. We're also targeting the back of the spine, but this is more gentle and you may not even notice this part. So sometimes I don't even mention it because I don't want people to do this because they might be like, well, I don't feel it in my back, and then they start pulling. So I think most of you have heard this before, but oftentimes if we feel it in our joints in our back, then we actually may have some damage back there. For instance, I have a back injury that I've been working through, and sometimes in these forward folds, I feel my back. That's not a good thing. Now, if you have a healthy spine and you start pulling enough, yes, eventually you will feel it in your back, but that's when you're beginning to create damage. You're actually probably stressing your back too much and probably wouldn't hurt yourself the first time you did it or the second time or maybe even the 50th time. But over a period of time, if you're practicing yin yoga regularly, you're stressing your spine like that, over time it's probably too much stress. So my recommendation is just let your arms relax, let gravity do the work for you in these forward folds. You'll see later when we get to the back bends how you can be quite aggressive with the spine, and that can actually be helpful in that direction. But this is where training, this is where understanding anatomy, this is where experience comes in. And this is why we might take a class with a teacher rather than just memorize a bunch of postures and do our own practice. Because these are the sorts of things that aren't necessarily obvious to an individual. They may not understand that. In fact, oftentimes when I'm teaching in person and someone is new to yin, I see them doing that. I see them pulling or yanking themselves down. Now, if you don't feel a stretch here or it's not strong enough, you might be tempted to do this. Again, I will say, please don't. Instead, just communicate that to me. I don't feel a stretch, or it's not strong enough, or whatever it is. And then I will teach you how to modify this shape so that without putting the stress in your spine, you can put the stress here. So for some individuals, it's just there's so much tension in this area that they may not feel it. So again, we can be more aggressive if necessary. For others, it's not that there's tension, it's actually that they're so flexible. All right, let's switch sides. So I would say these are the two cases where I usually have to give people more instruction. And again, this is where you might have to let me know that you fall into one of those camps. So one camp is I'm extremely flexible for some reason. I'm very flexible. And the other is I'm really not flexible for some reason. Most people do not fall on those edges. Most people are in the middle, and this is why this is the instruction I give to most people. It's just the basic instructions, and that works for probably about 90, 95, 99% of the people. But there's always those exceptions. And so I want to be clear that when you are one of those exceptions, you need to let me know. The other exception would be an injury. Now you've done something, you've hurt your hips, you've hurt your back for somehow. You may not even know that you've done that. But when you come into one of these shapes, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of discomfort. You just feel like something can't be right. This can't be right. I shouldn't be feeling this way, right? Again, that is where you want to communicate that to me, okay? All right, let's come up and then back onto our back, and we'll relax for about 30 seconds and rebound. So if you're not clear about what the rebound is about, a good place to start is just to feel the sensations in your body. See if you can put aside your worries, your thoughts, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, and just pay attention to what you feel. If you're not used to doing that, if it's very subtle, then it may not, you at first might be like, well, I don't feel anything, but that's never true. That's actually never true. You're always feeling something in your body. So when your brain comes back and says, well, I don't feel anything, that just means you're not feeling anything unusual. You don't feel particularly good, you don't feel particularly bad, but just tune into what's there. Even if it's just the weight of your clothes on the skin or the sensation of the air, the temperature of the air, whatever it might be, the weight of your body on the ground, just tune into that. But oftentimes you're going to feel your joints, you're going to feel deeper into your body during the rebound. All right, let's do a little counter stretch. We'll give our legs a little squeeze and shake it out. And then we will transition into the banana pose. So to do banana, we move our hips to the right edge of the mat. We move our legs and arms and head and neck and shoulders to the left. And we want to feel it in here. These are your obliques here. These are the intercostal muscles between the ribs. And then deep inside the center of our body, we have the spinal column, which we're bringing into what's called lateral flexion, which just helps to exercise the spine and keep it healthy and strong. Most people don't have a trouble with this particular shape, and there's also not a lot you can do with the props in this shape. But the one issue some people have is with their shoulders. So keep in mind you can drop those arms down, you just don't want to lose the stretch. So for instance, when I bring this arm down, I definitely feel less of a stretch. I still feel it, but it's much less. If I do this, I feel the stretch much more, okay? So keep that in mind. You don't want to injure yourself to get a stretch. It's not really a good trade-off. But at the same time, if you have to modify the posture, you may need to be more aggressive in other ways in order to get the same benefit. All right, let's switch sides. As you do, you might pause for a moment and just see if you can feel a difference between the side that we stretched and the side that we didn't. The reason I like you to do that is most people, at least after a little while, they can begin to feel a difference. And it's just good to know that that's something that we can actually perceive ourselves, that it's not just theory, it's not just imagination. We can actually feel the effect of having stretched for those 3 minutes on our body. Now, whether we actually appreciate what those sensations mean, that's a different story. We might be like, well, yeah, I feel a difference, but so what? But it's a start. We are beginning to tune back into our body, which is something most of us have learned to tune out our physical body. So tuning back into those sensations. And there's just more and more information coming out about the importance of listening to our body, taking care of our body. Before class today, I was watching a video from a podcast, and it was a neuroscientist. And she, I guess, coaches and counsels big CEO, big wigs, people who are CEOs for major corporations and things like that. And, she was trying to tell them how their stress level actually affects everyone else below them. That when they're in a meeting, and if they feel stressed out, even though they may be trying to hide it, they might be having a steely face, or they may not be saying much, or whatever it is. She was trying to tell them that they can't hide it, that the pheromones that they release through their sweat and through their skin, it affects other people. So we're just starting to learn more and more, how interdependent we all are. We might believe, I can be in a bad mood, or I can be stressed out, and that doesn't have to affect anybody else. But we're learning this just isn't true. So if you don't manage your own stress, and then you're going home to your family, you're affecting your family, you're affecting your children, you're affecting your spouse. If you don't manage your stress and you go into a business negotiation or business meeting, you're affecting everybody in that room, like it or not. And what she was trying to communicate to them is, generally, the higher up you are in the social pecking order, the more influence it will have. So that's why somebody who's the janitor who's in the room, they might be stressed out, but they're not going to affect the CEO as much as the CEO is going to affect the janitor. So this is, the higher up you are, the more influence you have in a group or organization, then in a sense, the higher responsibility you have to manage your own stress, because that is going to influence those who are your subordinates. All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. So generally speaking, this is relatively new information that we're having. When I was younger, people didn't really talk about managing their stress. It seemed like some people would have like a breakdown, but that was pretty rare. And that was really the only thing you were trying to avoid. Stress just seemed like a normal part of life, and it seemed like it didn't really affect much. You just dealt with it. But now we're learning it affects everything. It affects our health, our happiness, our well-being, and of course, it's affecting others as well. All right, let's bring our legs in and shake it out a little bit. All right, next we'll hinge up. So hands under the hips, legs up, lift the head and neck, lower the legs, and then pop yourself up to seated. Dragonfly is next, so we'll take the legs straight and wide. This is one that many people like to sit on something, so a block or a bolster, something like that, feel free to do that. And the stretch is generally right in here, the groin adductors. You might also feel it in your hamstrings, the back of the thigh as well. Okay, so we're just coming forward and down. Again, nice and relaxed, not using those hands, not trying to push. And if you feel like you're being pulled backward instead of forward, you can bend the knees and still get a stretch. Some people might get even a better stretch with their knees bent. Feel free to support the upper body with blocks under your forehead or forearms. And again, just let gravity and time do their work. All right, so we'll come up and transition to the frog before we take a longer rest. Now, when you're coming into frog, try and position your hips directly over your knees and then take your knees as wide as they can go. Once you've done that and you feel the stretch in the groin, feel free to rock your hips back, to change the position of your feet, so together or apart. You can flex or point the feet. Of course, you can stay up on your hands like so. You can also drop down to your elbows. You can even lay your torso on a big pillow or a bolster. You can also rest your forehead on a block. So again, the main stretch is going to be in the adductors, the groin muscles, the inside of the thigh. And again, the mechanism, the biomechanics for getting that stretch is just to take the knees as wide as they can possibly go. Okay. At a certain point, you just physically can't go any further. And at that point, you generally are feeling the stretch, because the reason you can't go any further for most people is going to be because of muscular or fascial tension. So the muscle, the fascia is stretched as far as it will go, and we begin to feel the stretch, the tension, if you will. For minority people, it's going to be bony compression, and those people would maybe feel it out here more, and those people would want to be less aggressive in their approach. They may even want to support their torso with a bolster or something like that, They may even want to bring their knees in a little bit. Now, if you play around with the hip position, leg position, you might find another stretch. Even if you get to that bony compression point, you might find that shifting things around, you're able to get out of the bony compression and begin to stretch the soft tissue again. But that's going to be a case-by-case basis. So you would have to experiment and see in which position you were able to recapture the stretching of the soft tissue. Not that that's even that important. If you are at that point, very good chance that you are at your healthy limit with your flexibility with that muscle group. You may be holding tension elsewhere that needs to be worked out, but at least for the time being, you have probably worked through most of the soft tissue tension in that area. And generally in yoga, we're trying to work through that tension because that tension is blocking the flow of energy through our body. And one of the basic ideas behind yoga and Taoist practices is it's that flow of energy that keeps us happy and healthy. It's a rather simple theory, and it's rather elegant in its simplicity. Okay, let's transition. I'm going to recommend child pose. You could also lay on your belly, but if you have really sensitive knees, you could lay on your back as well. All right, we're about the halfway mark, so let's come forward into a tabletop. We'll do a little bit of the bear pose here. Getting into the torso, shoulders, and hips with bear. And then after that, getting into your toes, feet, and legs with the down dog. Okay, let's switch to sleeping swan. So we bring the right knee forward. The foot goes to the left side of the mat, so very similar to pigeon. Now your foot can flex or point. It can be closer to the hip or closer to the front of your mat. Your knee can point straight ahead or angle out. You could stay up on your hands or drop down to your elbows. We want to feel it here, not in the knee or the ankle. So we really want to feel a juicy muscular stretch here. Now again, if you are unfamiliar with anatomy, with these practices, you may not be able to distinguish between bony compression and the sensation of a stretch. But even just being made aware of that distinction, I think you can begin to figure out the difference. What I've noticed over the years is almost all novice students, practitioners, they will describe everything as a stretch, even when it's bony compression. They describe any sensation they feel as a stretch, and they think that that's what's going on. But they don't really understand how stretching works and how our body works. So generally there will be two types of sensation, and I'm excluding injuries or trigger points or things like that. So there can be static noise, distortion in the signals we feel in our body because of health issues, other things. But if we're relatively healthy, we will feel two types of sensations when doing yoga postures. The most common one, and the one that is for the most part desirable, is a stretch. So hopefully all of you are feeling it here. Again, this is a rather large group of muscles. There's a lot of them. And most people, the vast majority of people, when doing this will feel a satisfying stretch. That's what you're feeling here. It's a stretch. This is not compression out here because the bones are being pulled away from one another. So you're not going to experience compression out here. If you were to experience compression, it would be on the inside of the hip. And that's possible. I've not really heard of it in this particular shape. No one's ever come to me and said, hey, I feel a lot of compression in my hip in this shape. But in theory, it's possible. This is maybe not the best pose to talk about compression and tension. Something like the half butterfly or caterpillar pose, those are perhaps easier poses to understand compression and tension. All right, let's switch sides. So I don't want to give anyone anxiety about this. Both compression and tension are healthy, they're natural, they're things that we experience. But when we feel them, they're sending different messages to us. So we want to, our attitude when we encounter one of those sensations should be different. It should be different depending on which one we're encountering. So generally when we're experiencing a stretch or tension like we feel here on the outside of the hip, in a sense we're getting the green light to go ahead. And so that green light might mean hold the stretch longer. It might mean you can be more aggressive in stretching. It might mean you can do that stretch more often. All of those types of things, like basically more. You can be more aggressive, you can hold longer, you can do it more often. In a sense, you can kind of push and your body will yield. Now, of course, you can overdo anything. So keep that in mind. But in general, it's going to yield results pushing in that direction. When we get to compression, it's basically two things bumping into one another. It's not something being stretched, right? It's two things bumping into one another, two bones essentially, or hard structures. Now they may have some soft tissue between, and often that's what creates the pain, is the muscle or the fascia that's between the two bones compressing. But basically what the compression signal is sending, it's saying, yeah, you're done, stop. Now it doesn't mean we can't benefit compressing our tissues a little bit. They do need to be compressed. It helps to move out toxins. It helps to stimulate the tissues. So it's, again, you sometimes read about compression in yoga literature as though it's like the most evil thing ever. Like, oh, you're compressing your tailbone. Oh, you're compressing this joint. Like, you don't need to freak out about compression. But I would say you want to be aware of it. You do want to know when you're compressing a joint. And at that point, you want to respectfully sort of ease off or say, okay, this is about as far as I can go in this particular direction with this particular stretch. Like I said, you may be able to manipulate the bones and find some more stretch that isn't being compressed, but you also may not be able to. All right, let's come on out of that. Again, I'm going to recommend child pose, laying on your belly. And if neither of those work, you can go ahead and lay on your back as well. Okay, so now we will come back into bear pose, down dog. Just give ourselves a little counter stretch, shake it out. And then we'll come onto our belly for Sphinx. Now this is an unusual part of this sequence. I don't do this in any other sequence that I can think of right now. So propping yourself up on your elbows, that is Sphinx. Normally I give you the option to go right into Seal, but today we will do one after the other. So if you're normally someone who jumps right into Seal pose, I'm going to encourage you just to hang out in Sphinx to start. And then if you normally are someone who only does Sphinx, I'm going to encourage you to explore the Seal pose, which will come next. Okay? So these are both back bends. They target mostly here, the low lumbar spine. And what's interesting is this is compression. So you've been hearing me talk a lot about compression and how you sort of need to respect the limits there, and that is very true. The thing is some people have really, really, really flexible spines, and so they need to go pretty far in a back bend like this before they're going to feel any compression. The other part of it is, like I already mentioned, our tissues do benefit from some compression as long as we don't overdo it. So what you would want to avoid in a posture like this pose or the next pose is having a weak or damaged spine and then really aggressively compressing it, because what that could do is rupture discs. It can herniate discs. It can damage discs. So you want to avoid that. But on the other hand, if you have a relatively healthy spine, then compressing it in these postures might actually help prevent a future injury, because you are stimulating the body, you are keeping those tissues healthy. The tissues need to be used to stay healthy, and one of the characteristics of modern life is lack of use of the different tissues in our body, the different joints in our body, the different types of tissue in our body. So we just don't get enough activity to really stimulate things to be at their optimum. And that's where something like yoga can be really, really helpful. In a sequence like this one, we're really being quite methodical about working the spine and working the hips pretty thoroughly. So we are, in a sense, injecting health and liveliness into those joints and muscles by doing this practice. Is this all you would need to do? No, but it's not a bad way to spend an hour of your allotted time for movement for the day. You know, you might take a day doing this, and then maybe tomorrow you go for a long hike or something like that. Okay, let's go ahead and transition. So we'll just straighten the arms. Now, if that's too intense, you can walk your hands forward, which is less intense. And if it's not intense enough, you can walk your hands back, okay? Now, I definitely feel a compression in my back. For me, it feels good. It feels safe. Now, again, am I going to try and like jam myself further back and be more aggressive? No. This is enough for me. On Tuesday, I had a young woman in class, and she basically had her shoulders directly over and maybe slightly behind her hips. So that's an example of what we call hypermobility. She was a very, very flexible individual, so she had to be quite aggressive before she felt any compression. What my teacher taught us is that people like that usually have one or two extra vertebrae that are mobile in this particular direction, what we call hyperextension. So most of us, I think we have like 3 or 4 joints that move in this direction in our lumbar. And somebody like this young lady probably has 1 or 2 extra, so that she might have 5 or 6 joints that move in that direction. And that allows her to go into that very deep back bend. So again, this is an illustration of how our bodies are different. I know when I was coming into yoga, I had the impression that if I just practiced long enough, hard enough, that I could change just about anything about my body through practice. And what I learned by studying with Paul is that that's just not really realistic or true. And in fact, if I approach my practice in that way, I might very well end up with a serious injury. And that does happen to people. It happened to my teacher, Paul, and he recognized what happened and he course corrected in how he approaches practice and also how he teaches. I've worked with 2 other senior yoga teachers who both had serious injuries that kept them from practicing yoga in their older age because they had pushed themselves in the same way that Paul had, except they didn't really recognize the warning signs. They didn't course correct. And so they just kept pushing, and eventually the injuries got worse and worse and worse to the point where they pretty much needed to stop practicing. All right, let's gradually come down. Your back might feel very, very sensitive at this point, and that's okay. Just come on down, rest on your belly. All right, from there we press back to a tabletop for bear pose, and you can also do some down dog to counter stretch. When you're done with that, just make your way onto your back, and we will do the twisted roots next. So laying on your back, you take the legs in. You can give them a quick squeeze if you want. And then we cross the right knee over the left, and we drop those knees to the left. Be sure to experiment with leg, arm, and head position to maximize the safe and effective twist in your body. So I think I've shared this with you before, but the theory of exercise, again, is very simple, it's very elegant, and it can help you understand what you're trying to do with both your yin practice and also other types of exercise that you might like to do. So the general theory is stress the tissues in your body intelligently within the safe range, and then rest those tissues. Okay, so depending on what you're doing, how much rest you need between stressing tissues will vary. So something like yin yoga, many people can practice yin yoga daily without trouble. Now, if you were to start doing yin yoga for hours and hours every day, then that might start to cause a problem. But generally, if you do an hour or something like that, and then you do other things and rest, then the next day you probably won't have a problem doing an hour again. I did that for long periods of time. I would just practice yin yoga every single day, and I didn't have any problems. The only time I felt that I was maybe starting to overdo it was when I was at teacher training with my teacher, Paul Grilly, out in California, and we were doing really long sessions every day. and I just began to feel a little bit of sensitivity in my joints when I wasn't practicing. And the solution to that was just to go for some long walks, to use the muscles and the connective tissue in a yang way, in the opposite from yin, and that sort of pulls everything back together. So very easy fix if that ever happens. Other types of training, exercise, you may need to rest more. I don't know if there have been rigorous scientific studies done on exactly how long you need to rest between, working out, a certain kind of workout. There are many different ways that you can work out. There's cardiovascular, there's high intensity interval training, there's aerobic, there's anaerobic. So, there really is many different approaches. There's, exercising to failure versus doing a certain number of reps. All right, let's go ahead and switch sides. So I'm just going to share with you my own kind of feeling about these things. And, it may change. I might learn something new or try something different that changes my opinion about it. But in general, I think it's not a bad idea to rest the particular tissues that are sore or stiff or sensitive until they are no longer that way. I think this is how things would happen in a natural setting. In the natural setting is where we would be likely most healthy. Now, there are likely tons of exceptions to this, but in general, if you were a human in the wild, and as long as you weren't starving or in physical danger, let's say you were walking in the woods and a bobcat came out and lunged at you. And so you started sprinting, running away from the bobcat. You got away, made it back to your camp with your tribe. And then the next day, you might be really sore in your legs because you were running, you were full of adrenaline and cortisol. And so the next day, you're sore. Well, that day, you would probably very naturally elect not to do something that physically active. In fact, you might have shared the story with your tribes people, and they might say, "Oh, you need a rest today. Like we're going hunting, but why don't you just go ahead and rest?" Or whatever it might be. You may not have that luxury, but you might. And so you would naturally elect, while you felt that in your body, you would elect to maybe take it a little easier. It wouldn't be like modern life where you're on some kind of a schedule and you are like, well, I'm just going to push through it. Sometimes that would be necessary in a natural environment. So I think we're adapted to be able to do that. But doing that constantly, always feeling pain or soreness or stiffness in your body, probably not the best thing for your body. You want to rest and let your body recover. So again, the theory of exercise is stress the tissues and then rest the tissues and then repeat. So it's not enough to do that one time. You want to rest them. And again, if it's yin yoga, probably 24 hours is plenty. If it's a really intense workout, then you might need 48 hours or 72 hours. It also depends on things like your age and your diet and what are you doing for recovery? Are you taking an Epsom salt bath? Are you going in the sauna? Are you icing? How are you taking care of the recovery process? All right, let's unwind. So again, I'm just sharing my experience with you. My experience has been anytime that I am have a lot of pain and discomfort in my body and I try and just simply exercise over that and continue pushing, it doesn't seem to yield ideal results. Usually the best results seem to be doing something, stressing my tissues to the point where they're sore or they're stiff, I feel it in my body, but then letting them recover and rest and perhaps doing certain things to help in that recovery process. All right, let's bring our legs in and we will give ourselves a little bit of a counter stretch. And then if you'd like, you can rest for the next few minutes in Shavasana, or what we call in Yin Yoga Pentacle pose.